This happened about 3 years ago. I still think about it every time someone suggests going camping. At the time, I had just started getting into hiking and backpacking. Nothing extreme, just weekend trips into national forests a few hours from where I lived. I liked the quiet. No traffic. No phones ringing. Just trees and the sound of wind moving through them. That particular trip was supposed to be simple. A 2-day hike through a forest trail system that looped around a small mountain ridge. According to the map, there were several legal backcountry camping spots along the trail. Nothing remote enough to be dangerous, or at least, that's what I thought. I started hiking around mid-afternoon. The weather was perfect, cool air, clear sky, the kind of day that makes the forest feel peaceful instead of intimidating. The trail itself was narrow, but easy to follow. Tall pine trees everywhere. The ground was soft with old needles and leaves, so every step was quiet. For the first hour or two, I passed a few other hikers, a couple with backpacks, 2 guys with a dog, normal people. But after a while, the trail got quieter. Eventually, I realized I hadn't seen anyone in almost an hour. That didn't bother me, though. Honestly, that was the whole reason I came out there. Around early evening, I found a small clearing just off the trail. It looked like other people had camped there before. There was an old fire ring made of stones, some flattened. Ground where tents had probably been set up many times. It seemed like a perfect place to stop for the night. So I dropped my pack and started setting up camp. My tent was small. Just a 1-person backpacking tent. Nothing fancy. Within about 15 minutes, I had everything ready. Tent set up, sleeping bag inside. Small fire going in the stone ring. The forest was already getting darker by then. Sunlight barely made it through the trees. Remember sitting there by the fire, eating a dehydrated meal and just listening to the forest. It was quiet, but not in a creepy way. Just normal forest sounds. Wind in the branches, occasional insects, distant cracking sounds from somewhere far in the woods. Animals moving around. Completely normal. At least, it felt normal at the time. After I finished eating, I walked a short distance into the trees to hang my food bag on a branch. Just basic camping stuff, so animals wouldn't get into it. That's when I noticed something strange. Footprints. They were in the soft dirt near the edge of the clearing. At first I assumed they were from previous campers, but something about them made me stop for a moment. They looked fresh. The edges weren't smoothed out by wind or leaves, and they were heading directly toward the clearing from deeper in the woods. I stood there for a few seconds looking at them. Then I laughed a little. I figured another hiker must have come through earlier that day. Maybe someone who had camped there the night before. Not a big deal. Still, something about them stuck in my mind. I finished hanging the food bag and walked back to the fire. By then, forest was getting darker fast. The kind of darkness where the trees start blending together. Where everything outside the firelight becomes just black shapes. I added a few more sticks to the fire. Then I checked my phone out of habit. No signal, which I expected. This area was pretty far from any town. Eventually the fire burned low. The air was getting colder too. So I decided to call it a night. I climbed into the tent and zipped it closed. Small headlamp hanging from the top of the tent gave off a soft light, enough to see my bag and some of my gear. I remember lying there, listening to the forest, branches moving, leaves shifting. Few distant animal sounds. Nothing unusual. Eventually I turned the lamp off. The inside of the tent went completely dark. I was probably asleep within 15 minutes, but sometime later, I woke up. At first, I didn't know why. Everything was silent. Too silent. Then, I heard it, a step, very slow. Soft. Right outside the tent. I froze immediately. Another step, leaves crunching quietly. Someone was walking. Very slowly around my tent, and they weren't trying to be loud. They were trying to be quiet. I held my breath. The footsteps stopped. For a few seconds, there was nothing. Then something brushed lightly against the side of the tent. Fabric, like a hand, testing it. And that's when I realized something that made my stomach drop. Whoever was outside had been standing right next to my tent. In the dark, watching me. And I had no idea how long they'd been there. For a few seconds I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I just lay there in my sleeping bag, staring at the dark fabric of the tent above me. My brain was trying to process what I had just heard. Footsteps. Right outside. Slow. Careful. Whoever it was had been walking in a circle around my tent. And then touching it. The first thought that crossed my mind was another camper. Maybe someone who got lost in the dark. Maybe someone trying to see if anyone was inside. But something about the way those footsteps sounded didn't feel right. They were too slow. Too deliberate. And whoever it was hadn't said a single word. If you accidentally walk up to someone's campsite in the middle of the night, you usually say something. Hey, sorry, didn't mean to scare you. Anything, but this person had stayed completely silent. I stayed perfectly still. The forest around me was quiet again. Then I heard another step. Crunch. It was behind the tent. Now. Moving slowly through the leaves. Another step. Crunch. They were circling again. I slowly reached toward the small pocket near my head and grabbed my phone. The screen lit up the inside of the tent with a faint glow. 2:17 My heart was pounding now. I turned the brightness all the way down so the light wouldn't shine through the fabric. Then I listened. Another step. closer this time. Whoever it was had come back to the front of the tent. Right near the entrance. Zipper. I could hear breathing. Slow. Calm. Breathing, and then the sound of fabric moving, a hand sliding across the outside of the tent wall again, just lightly brushing it like they were, feeling the shape of it, trying to understand where I was inside. My entire body went rigid. I didn't know what to do. If I stayed quiet, maybe they would leave. But another thought crossed my mind. What if they were trying to see if anyone was inside? What if they thought the tent was empty? My throat felt dry. Finally, I forced myself to speak. Hello? My voice came out quieter than I expected, almost like a whisper. The footsteps stopped. Immediately. Total silence. Whoever was outside froze. I waited. 5 seconds, 10 seconds. Nothing. So I tried again. Hey, can I help you? Still nothing. No answer. No movement. Just the sound of wind moving high in the trees above us. Then, very slowly, I heard a step, but this time it was moving away. Crunch. Another step. Crunch. The sound moved farther into the forest. Within about 15 seconds. It was gone, completely gone. I stayed in the exact same position for at least 5 minutes. Listening. Nothing. Came back. Eventually I let out a breath. I didn't realize I was holding. I tried to convince myself it was just another hiker. Maybe someone who was camping nearby. Maybe they got curious when they saw my fire earlier. Something still felt wrong. The way they walked. The way they stayed silent. The way they touched the tent. Normal. People don't do that. Eventually, I reached over and turned my headlamp on. The inside of the tent filled with light. Part of me wanted to unzip the door and check outside, but another part of me immediately shut that idea down. If someone was out there, I didn't want them knowing exactly where my head was inside the tent. So I stayed where I was for a long time. Eventually exhaustion started creeping back, and my body relaxed just enough that I started drifting off again. But I never slept deeply. Every small noise woke me up. Leaves shifting. Wind. Distant cracks from animals moving. Hours passed like that. Half asleep. Half listening. Then, sometime later, I woke up again, this time to a different sound. A very small sound. Right beside the tent. Like something being pressed slowly into the ground. I opened my eyes. The headlamp was still on, but dim. And then I heard it. Breathing. Right outside the tent again. Closer than before. Much closer. And this time, it wasn't moving. Whoever was outside was standing completely still, right next to my head. I slowly turned my eyes toward the wall of the tent, and that's when I saw it. Shadow, the shape of a person, only a few inches away from my face on the other side of the fabric. They had been standing there, watching me, completely silent, for who knows How long? My heart started racing so fast I thought they would hear it. Then something moved. Slowly. Very slowly. The shadow lifted an arm. And a finger pressed gently against the tent fabric. Exactly where my head was. And then I heard a quiet voice right outside, barely above a whisper. I know you're awake. My entire body went cold because the voice sounded calm. Almost patient, like they had all the time in the world. And that's when I realized something even worse. The footsteps I heard earlier might not have been the first time they walked around my tent that night. It might have been the first time I woke up. For a moment, I couldn't move. My entire body felt locked in place inside the sleeping bag. The finger was still pressed against the tent fabric, right where my head was. The thin material pushed inward slightly from the pressure. Whoever was outside knew exactly where I was lying, and they weren't guessing. They had been watching long enough to know. I know you're awake. The voice had been quiet, almost calm. Not angry, not aggressive. That somehow made it worse, because it didn't sound like someone who had just stumbled onto my campsite. It sounded like someone who had been waiting. I forced myself to speak again. My voice felt tight. Who are you? The finger slowly slid down the fabric of the tent, dragging lightly across it. I could hear the faint scratch of their nail against the material. Then the voice came again. Still calm. You shouldn't be here. My heart was pounding so hard it almost hurt. I swallowed. This is a public campsite. For a few seconds there was no response. Then I heard a quiet sound, a soft chuckle, not loud. But enough to send a cold wave through my chest. No, the voice said softly. It isn't. And then the shadow moved. The figure stepped away from the side of the tent. I heard leaves crunch under their feet. They walked slowly around the back again, just like before, but this time I didn't stay still. Adrenaline had completely taken over. I grabbed my headlamp and turned the brightness all the way up. Then I reached for the small camping knife I kept in my bag. It wasn't big, just a basic folding knife, but holding it made me feel slightly less helpless. The footsteps stopped again behind the tent. Then the voice spoke once more. You should stay inside. My throat tightened. Why? For a moment, there was only wind moving through the trees. Then the voice answered. Because I know the forest better than you do. That was the moment I made the decision. I wasn't staying there until morning. Not with someone circling my tent all night. Not with someone who clearly knew exactly where I was. I quickly started packing what I could. Reach. Phone. Keys. Knife. Headlamp. I shoved them into my jacket pockets. My backpack was outside the tent near the fire ring, but I didn't care about it anymore. I just needed to get out of there. The trailhead parking lot was about 2 miles back down the trail. If I moved fast, I could probably reach my car in under an hour. The forest was quiet again, too quiet. I slowly reached toward the tent zipper. My hand was shaking. And then the voice spoke again, right outside the tent entrance. Much closer than I expected. I wouldn't do that. My heart slammed in my chest. They were right in front of the door. Standing there, blocking the only exit. I froze again. The fabric of the tent moved slightly as the person leaned closer. I could see their shadow clearly now through the material. Tall, thin, and completely still. You won't make it back before sunrise. The voice sounded almost sympathetic. Like they were giving advice. You don't know the trails. My mind was racing. Was this person bluffing? Trying to scare me into staying? Or were they actually planning something worse if I stepped outside? Seconds passed. Neither of us moved. Finally, I spoke again, trying to sound calm. Look, I don't want any problems. Silence. Then the person said something that made the situation even more terrifying. You already made one. My stomach dropped. What? The shadow outside shifted slightly, like they were tilting their head. You set up camp in my clearing. My brain struggled to process that. My clearing. Not the forest. Not the campsite. The clearing. That meant something very different. And then they said something else. Something that made the situation suddenly feel much worse. I've been watching you since you got here. My grip on the knife tightened. How long? There was a pause. Then the voice answered. Since the trail? Every muscle in my body went tense. Trail. That meant they had been following me for hours. Maybe longer. That explained the footprints I saw earlier. They hadn't been old. They had been his. And then the voice spoke again, quieter now. Most people don't come this far alone. My brain was screaming at me to move. To run. To do something. But the person was still standing directly outside the zipper, blocking the exit. Then something changed. I heard another sound. Not from the tent. Not from the person outside. From deeper in the forest. Branches cracking. More than one. Step. Several. Moving somewhere in the dark. The person outside the tent heard it too. Because the shadow suddenly turned, facing the woods. For the first time since this started, they sounded nervous. What the hell? They muttered quietly. Then the footsteps outside my tent moved quickly, rushing away into the trees. Leaves crunching fast. Running. Within seconds, they were gone. The forest went silent again. But now I was left sitting in the tent, realizing something that made the situation even worse. The person stalking me had just run away from something else. Something moving through the forest. And I had no idea what it was. Asterisk. For a moment, I just sat there, completely frozen. The man who had been stalking me for hours had just run into the forest like he was scared of something. And now I was alone again, or at least that's what I hoped. The forest around. The tent was silent. Too silent. I slowly leaned closer to the tent door and listened. Nothing. No footsteps. No voices. Just wind moving through the trees. Part of me wanted to stay inside until morning. But another part of my brain was screaming that this was my chance to leave. The man was gone. If I waited, he might come back. And now there was something else moving in the woods. I made the decision quickly. I grabbed my phone and tightened my grip on the knife. Then I slowly unzipped the tent door. The sound of the zipper felt incredibly loud in the quiet forest. When the opening was big enough, I pushed the flap aside and stepped out. Cold night air hit my face. The clearing looked completely empty. The fire I had made earlier had burned down to faint glowing embers. Beyond that, only darkness. My backpack was still lying near the fire ring. I grabbed it and quickly pulled it onto my shoulders. I didn't bother packing anything properly. I just needed to move. Fast. I turned on my HEADLAMP. The beam cut through the darkness and lit up the narrow trail leading away from the clearing. For a second I hesitated. Then I started walking. At first I walked quickly, but within a minute I was almost jogging. Branches brushed against my arms as I moved down the path. My headlamp bounced with every step. The forest felt different now. Every shadow looked like someone standing between the trees. Every sound made my heart jump. I kept expecting to hear footsteps behind me, but nothing followed. After about 10 minutes, I started calming down slightly. Maybe the man had actually left. Maybe whatever scared him away had also scared him off completely. I kept moving. 15 minutes passed, then 20. The trail slowly sloped downward toward the parking area. I checked my phone again. 3:02. Still no signal, but I knew I had to be getting close to the trailhead. Then, something in the dirt ahead of me caught the beam of my HELAMP. Footprints. I stopped. They were fresh, very fresh. They were heading the same direction I was going, toward the parking lot. I crouched slightly and looked closer. The pattern matched the ones I had seen earlier near the clearing. Same size. Same shape. The man who had been stalking me had run this way. That meant he was ahead of me on the trail. My chest tightened. I stood there for a moment thinking, if I turned around, I would be going back into the forest, back toward that clearing. And possibly toward whatever scared him away. So I kept moving, but slower now, more careful. My headlamp scanned the trail constantly. Left, right, every tree. Every shadow. After another 10 minutes, the forest started thinning. That meant the parking Lot had to be close. Relief started creeping, and I could almost see the open space through the trees. Then my light landed on something in the middle of the trail, and I stopped. Again, it was a backpack. Lying on the ground, I recognized it. Immediately, it was the same one the man had been wearing earlier. I hadn't seen it clearly in the dark, but now I was sure the bag was open, like it had been dropped suddenly. I stood there staring at it. The forest was completely silent again. Something about the bag made my stomach twist. Slowly, I stepped closer. Inside the backpack were several things. A flashlight, some rope, a small camera, and a notebook. The notebook was open, like someone had been writing in it recently. Against my better judgment, I picked it up. The pages were filled with writing. Names, dates, times, some. Pages had small maps drawn on them, different parts of the forest. Different trails. But what made my blood run cold were the most recent pages. They had descriptions, short notes about people. About hikers. And on the last page, I saw something that made my hands start shaking. My name. Written at the top of the page. Below it were several lines. Arrived at trailhead 2:41 p.m. Male, alone, blue backpack, gray jacket, followed North Trail. My heart started pounding again. He had been documenting me for hours, maybe longer. But then I noticed something else. At the bottom of the page, there was another line written much more messily, like it had been scribbled in a hurry. Not alone. I stared at those words for several seconds, trying to understand them. Then a sound came from the trees behind me, a slow step, leaves crunching softly. My entire body went rigid, very slowly. I turned around. The beam of my headlamp moved across the dark forest. Tree, trunks. Branches. Shadows. And then it stopped. About 20 feet off the trail. Standing between the trees. Was a person. Tall. Completely still, watching me. I couldn't see their face. The light only reached their chest, but I could see one thing clearly. They were holding something, a hunting knife. The same one the man outside my tent had been carrying earlier, which meant only one thing. The man who had been stalking me wasn't the person standing in the forest. And then the figure slowly tilted their head, like they were studying me. Just like the other man had done earlier, except this time I knew something much worse. The man who had been stalking me in the woods hadn't been hunting me. He had been watching me because he knew someone else already was. And I had just found the first person's body without even realizing it. Z. A. Zotek, formulary cock, formulaire, asterisk.